It begins in isolation on a damp, windswept island far from any shore. The year is 1821. A 51-year-old man, once the most feared commander in Europe, lies on a makeshift bed in a wooden house where the roof leaks and the air is heavy with mildew. The guards outside whisper about the prisoner who shook empires. He is restless. He knows his hours are numbered. In his delirium, he mutters the names of a nation, an army, and a woman. He thinks of France, of his soldiers, of the head of the army, of Joséphine. He sees battles fought in snow and on scorching plains. He sees himself crowning an empress and capturing cities, only to be exiled, forgotten. The last breath of Napoleon Bonaparte is laden with memory and regret, but also with the knowledge that history will never forget him. The man who fashioned himself emperor of the French and reshaped continents is fading, yet his story is just beginning for us. From this lonely deathbed, we will trace the remarkable journey of a boy from Corsica who became the face of revolution, the architect of an empire, and one of the most controversial figures to ever walk across a battlefield. He was born on an August morning in 1769 in the town of Ajaccio on the Mediterranean island of Corsica. His family, the Bonapartes, descended from minor Italian nobility who had moved to the island in earlier centuries. His father, Carlo, was a lawyer who had once fought for Corsican independence before accepting the new French administration. His mother, Letizia, was strict and deeply religious, instilling in her son a sense of destiny and discipline. The island had just been ceded to France, and the local language and customs were still more Italian than French. The infant, Napoleon Bonaparte, grew up hearing Corsican and Italian spoken at home. He felt the tension of a people struggling between independence and assimilation, and that duality would mark him for life. There were many siblings: Joseph, Lucien, Elisa, Louis, Pauline, Caroline, and Jerome, but the second child, the thin, sharp-eyed boy with jet black hair, would outshine them all. From his earliest years, he was fiercely attached to his mother. Later, he would remark that a child's future was forged by its mother. Letizia's discipline contained his wildness, and her belief in his future fed his boundless ambition. At 9 years old, he left his island home to attend school in mainland France. He arrived in Autun, not yet fluent in French, and quickly transferred to the military academy at Brienne-le-Château. There he was taunted for his accent, his birthplace, and his short stature. The boy who would one day command massive armies spent his school days solitary and somber, wandering through the snow with books under his arm. He read the histories of great empires, memorized the lives of Alexander and Caesar, and excelled at mathematics. An examiner noted that he would make an excellent sailor because of his facility with numbers and his interest in geography. Yet he preferred the ground to the sea. His years at Brienne hardened him. He learned to conceal his emotions behind a mask of cold detachment, to plan obsessively, and to seize opportunities. He became an outspoken Corsican nationalist and admired the island patriot Pasquale Paoli. When he moved to the École Militaire in Paris at 15, his father's death forced him to complete the 2-year program in just 1 year. He became the first Corsican graduate and commissioned as a second lieutenant in the artillery. His early service at Valence and Auxonne was unremarkable, but he read voraciously and developed an encyclopedic knowledge of past campaigns. When the French Revolution erupted in 1789, he was still a junior officer, but the turmoil created opportunities. He returned to Corsica with a fierce sense of mission. The island was torn between royalists, revolutionaries, and nationalists. Napoleon sided with the Jacobins and supported the French Republic against Paoli's separatism. He commanded a battalion of volunteers and was promoted to captain in the regular army. His family became entangled in island politics. In 1793, after failing to seize Ajaccio from Paoli's supporters and being declared traitors by the Corsican Assembly, the Bonapartes fled to Toulon. Napoleon's fierce loyalty to his cause and to his family marked him early. He was willing to forsake his homeland to pursue destiny on the mainland. His chance came in Toulon, where royalist forces and allied fleets had seized the city in the name of the old regime. The Republic needed someone to break the siege and retake the port. The young artillery officer proposed a bold plan to capture a strategic hill overlooking the harbor. On a cold December night, under heavy fire, his guns battered enemy positions and forced the Allies to evacuate. The victory brought him the attention of Augustin Robespierre, brother of Maximilian, and at 24, he was promoted to brigadier general. From obscurity, he leapt into the circles of power. For a brief moment, politics threatened to ruin him. The fall of the Jacobins made him suspect, and he was arrested, but soon released. He refused a demoted infantry post and languished unemployed, writing a romantic novella and contemplating his future. An uprising of royalists in Paris in October 1795 provided his salvation. Paul Barras, a leader of the Thermidorian government, knew of his skill at Toulon and made him second in command of the capital's defense. When the rebel mob advanced on the Tuileries, Napoleon ordered cannon dragged into position and fired grape shot into the crowd, a brutal act that scattered the insurgents. Hundreds died on the cobblestones, and the whiff of gun smoke saved the revolution. In reward, the new Directory promoted him to commander of the Army of the Interior and then to command of the Army of Italy. On the eve of this appointment, he married Joséphine de Beauharnais, a widow 6 years his senior with 2 children. He was smitten by her charm and social connections. She was initially indifferent but saw his rising star. When Napoleon took command of the ragged, ill-supplied army of Italy in the spring of 1796, he found an opportunity to prove the audacity of his thinking. He immediately went on the offensive, striking swiftly at the Kingdom of Sardinia in the Piedmont before Austrian reinforcements could arrive. In a whirlwind campaign known as Montenat, he knocked Sardinia out of the war in 2 weeks. He then besieged Mantua and defeated every Austrian relief force sent to break the siege. Victories at Castiglione, Bassano, Arcole, and Rivoli secured northern Italy for France. At Rivoli, nearly half of the Austrian army was killed, wounded, or captured. Napoleon not only displayed brilliance in maneuver and the use of artillery, but also negotiated the Treaty of Leoben, forcing the Habsburg monarchy to sue for peace. His army captured tens of thousands of prisoners, hundreds of guns, and reaped millions of francs in contributions and art treasures. He extorted wealth and masterpieces from Venice and other Italian states. While his soldiers saw themselves as liberators spreading the revolution, their general was also enriching France and himself. The Italian campaign made Napoleon a national hero and a political force. He founded newspapers to trumpet his victories and to shape public opinion. His meteoric rise worried the Directory, which feared his popularity could threaten their control. Instead of confronting the British Navy head-on, Napoleon proposed an expedition to Egypt that would strike at British trade routes and open a French path to India. The plan fused his military ambition with scientific curiosity. In 1798, he sailed with tens of thousands of soldiers and a corps of scientists and artists. En route, he captured Malta with hardly any losses and landed at Alexandria. In the desert, he defeated the Mamluk cavalry at the battle he called the Pyramids, forming his infantry into giant squares that repelled waves of horsemen, while he pointed to the ancient monuments and urged his men to remember that 40 centuries looked down upon them. His scholars recorded discoveries and brought back the Rosetta Stone, which would later unlock the secrets of hieroglyphics. Yet the Egyptian expedition also exposed his ruthlessness and his limits. Horatio Nelson's fleet destroyed the French ships at the Battle of the Nile, leaving Napoleon's army stranded. Marching into Syria, he captured cities but found his forces ravaged by disease. In Jaffa, he ordered thousands of prisoners and some civilians executed after learning that many had broken parole. He later justified the massacre as a grim necessity, but even his own officers were shaken. His army failed to take the fortress of Acre and retreated to Egypt. When plague decimated his ranks, he has been accused of poisoning his own sick soldiers to prevent them from slowing the retreat. News reached him that France's armies were losing ground to a new coalition. Realizing his absence might imperil the Republic, he abandoned his army in Egypt to return to Europe. Though deserting his men, he arrived in Paris to adulation. The political situation was ripe for another seizure of power. France in 1799 was bankrupt and exhausted by war. The Directory was corrupt and ineffective, and Royalist and Jacobin factions threatened a return to chaos. Napoleon maneuvered himself into the center of the conspiracy with the aid of Emmanuel Joseph Sieyès, his brother Lucien, and Foreign Minister Talleyrand. On the 9th and 10th of November, known as the 18th of Brumaire, armed grenadiers intimidated the legislature and forced the dissolution of the Directory. The coup established 3 consuls, but real power lay with the first consul, Napoleon himself. A new constitution, approved by plebiscite in 1800, created a facade of democracy while concentrating authority in his hands. He quickly reformed the government, instituted efficient taxation, stabilized finances, and granted amnesty to many émigrés. He crushed internal revolts through a mix of amnesty and repression, censored the press, and closed oppositional newspapers. His regime has been described as a soft despotism or dictatorship sanctioned by popular vote. But many Frenchmen, exhausted by a decade of turmoil, welcomed strong leadership. Napoleon understood that to secure his rule, he must deliver peace and prosperity. In the spring of 1800, he led an army across the Alps to surprise Austrians who had reoccupied Italy. The crossing through the Great St. Bernard Pass was arduous, but his troops appeared in northern Italy and triumphed at the Battle of Marengo. Reinforcements under Louis XVI arrived late in the day and turned near defeat into victory. Further victories at Hohenlinden forced Austria to sign the Treaty of Luneville, ending the War of the Second Coalition. Peace with Britain followed in the Treaty of Amiens in 1802, temporarily ending hostilities. With Europe quiet, Napoleon focused on his internal reforms. His civil code, promulgated in 1804 and later known as the Napoleonic Code, replaced the maze of regional laws with a unified system that enshrined equality before the law, religious tolerance, and secure property rights. It abolished feudal privileges and guaranteed equal inheritance, but it also reinforced the authority of husbands over wives and limited the rights of women and children. He reintroduced slavery in French colonies that had been freed by revolutionary law and cracked down on freedom of the press. He adopted the metric system and reformed education, creating state-run lycées and professional schools to train administrators and officers. He established the Legion of Honor to reward merit. His reforms modernized France and left a lasting legacy, even while they revealed contradictions between revolutionary ideals and authoritarian practice. Napoleon's consolidation of power was also entwined with his management of religion, colonial ambition, and personal relationships. In 1801, he concluded a concordat with the Pope that acknowledged Catholicism as the faith of the majority while asserting the state's control over ecclesiastical appointments, a maneuver that pacified a devout population without restoring the Ancien Regime Church. The agreement temporarily settled a religious divide, but it foreshadowed later clashes when he imprisoned the pontiff to enforce his will. That same year, he moved decisively to protect colonial revenue. Although the revolution had abolished slavery, Napoleon reinstated it in most French overseas territories and ordered forces to suppress revolts and reimpose bondage. He sent his brother-in-law, Charles Leclerc, to Saint-Domingue to restore French control. The expedition succumbed to disease and relentless resistance, leading to the independence of Haiti and signaling the demise of French imperial dreams in the Caribbean. Confronted with mounting costs and the threat of renewed war with Britain, he sold the enormous Louisiana territory to the United States in exchange for much-needed funds, thereby doubling the size of the young republic and reshaping North America. At home, he stabilized finances by taxing salt, alcohol, and tobacco, and by extracting levies from satellite states under French domination. He staged plebiscites to legitimize his authority, inflating returns and proclaiming near-unanimous support when in reality, turnout was modest and dissent suppressed. His police silenced critics, exiling journalists and closing newspapers. He created a new aristocracy by elevating his marshals and siblings to dukes and kings, binding their loyalty to his bloodline. In private, he alternated between intense passion and cold calculation. The fervent letters he sent Joséphine during his campaigns attest to vulnerability, yet he discarded her when she failed to produce an heir. His marriage to Marie-Louise served diplomatic purposes more than love, though he cherished the son she bore him. He took mistresses, arranged advantageous marriages for his siblings, and managed the careers of his marshals to keep them dependent. Thus, behind the facade of enlightened reform lay a web of personal ambition and control that touched every aspect of his empire. By 1804, plots against his life and the fragility of his power convinced Napoleon to transform the Republic into a hereditary empire. The execution of the Duke of Enghien for an alleged royalist conspiracy shocked Europe, but the Senate declared him Emperor of the French, and a plebiscite confirmed the new constitution. In a splendid ceremony at Notre Dame Cathedral, in the presence of Pope Pius, he took the crown and placed it on his own head before crowning Joséphine. He swore to uphold the gains of the revolution even as he resurrected monarchy. The coronation signaled his ambition to rival Charlemagne and the Roman emperors. The following year, he declared himself King of Italy and donned the Iron Crown of Lombardy. His brothers and sisters were elevated to royal status. He made Joseph King of Naples and later Spain, Louis King of Holland, and his other siblings princes and princesses. The Bonaparte dynasty was spreading over Europe, supported by French bayonets. Napoleon's empire provoked coalition after coalition as Britain, Austria, Russia, and Prussia tried to contain his expansion. In 1805, the Third Coalition formed. Napoleon moved his Grande Armée with unprecedented speed, outmaneuvered Austrian forces, and forced a large army at Ulm to surrender. French troops then entered Vienna, capturing masses of guns and supplies. On the 2nd of December, near the Moravian town of Austerlitz, he faced a combined Russian and Austrian army. He feigned weakness to lure the Allies off the high ground, then suddenly seized the central Pratzen Heights and crushed the Allied center. Thousands of Russian soldiers drowned on the frozen lakes as they fled. The battle led to the Treaty of Pressburg and the dissolution of the Holy Roman Empire. Napoleon considered Austerlitz his finest victory, and many contemporaries began to see him as invincible. After Austerlitz, he redrew the map of Germany. He created the Confederation of the Rhine, a grouping of German states under French protection, and deposed the Bourbon King of Naples in favor of his brother Joseph. His growing influence alarmed Prussia. In 1806, the Fourth Coalition challenged him. At the twin battles of Jena and Auerstedt, his army annihilated the Prussians, capturing tens of thousands of prisoners and destroying their forces. He marched into Poland and fought the Russians in bitter winter battles, ultimately winning a costly victory at Friedland and forcing Tsar Alexander to negotiate. The Treaty of Tilsit remade Europe. Prussia lost half its territory and was forced to pay a huge indemnity. Russia allied with France but remained uneasy. Napoleon's treatment of Prussia sowed deep resentment, and his alliance with Russia was fragile. To weaken Britain, he issued the Berlin Decree establishing the Continental System, a trade embargo intended to ruin British commerce. The blockade was widely violated and hurt the economies of allies and enemies alike. Portugal refused to comply, so Napoleon ordered an invasion. In 1808, French troops crossed into Portugal and soon occupied Lisbon. Events in Spain quickly spiraled out of control. Napoleon forced the abdication of the Bourbon king and made his elder brother Joseph king of Spain. The Spanish rose in revolt on the 2nd of May, and a brutal guerrilla war erupted. British troops landed to support the insurgents, and at Bailen, a French army surrendered for the first time, shocking Europe. Napoleon personally led reinforcements and recaptured Madrid, but he soon returned to France, leaving the conflict to drag on. The Peninsular War tied down hundreds of thousands of troops and drained his empire. He later admitted it was the war that ruined him. Meanwhile, Austria saw an opportunity while France was bogged down in Spain. In 1809, the Fifth Coalition launched a surprise attack. Napoleon hurried from Paris and fought battles at Eckmühl and Aspern-Essling. At Aspern-Essling, his army was repulsed. Both sides suffered horrific casualties, and for the first time, Napoleon's aura of invincibility cracked. He regrouped and 6 weeks later forced a bloody victory at Wagram. But losses were enormous on both sides. Austria sued for peace but had to cede territory and pay indemnities. Seeking to secure his dynasty, Napoleon divorced Joséphine, who had not provided an heir, and married the Archduchess Marie-Louise of Austria. In 1811, she gave birth to a son, proclaimed King of Rome. This alliance with the Habsburgs temporarily strengthened his legitimacy and created a European royal network, but it also alienated his Russian ally. At the height of his power, Napoleon directly or indirectly ruled over much of continental Europe. Through annexation of the Papal States, Holland and northern Germany, and through his satellite kingdoms, he controlled the destinies of tens of millions of people. He imposed the Napoleonic Code, reformed education, modernized administration, and promoted nationalism. Yet his constant demands for soldiers and taxes created resentment. His continental system stifled trade, and his arbitrary reordering of territories affronted traditional elites. Tsar Alexander grew suspicious when Napoleon created the Grand Duchy of Warsaw and married into the Austrian imperial family. When France annexed the Duchy of Oldenburg, related to the Russian royal family, Alexander responded by reopening Russian ports to neutral shipping and restricting French goods. Napoleon interpreted this as betrayal and began preparing his largest military endeavor. In the summer of 1812, he assembled the Grande Armée, an enormous multinational force estimated at 450,000 men. He told his soldiers they were embarking on the Second Polish War, but refused to promise the restoration of Poland to avoid alienating Austria and Prussia. On the 24th of June, his forces crossed the Niemen River into Russian territory. He intended to force a decisive battle, but the Russians retreated deeper into the vastness of their land, burning villages and fields behind them. The French captured Smolensk at great cost. On the 7th of September, they met the Russians at Borodino, a slaughter that left tens of thousands dead or wounded on each side. Napoleon remarked later that it was the most terrible of his battles. The Russians withdrew, and on the 14th of September, he entered Moscow. That night, fires consumed the city on orders of its governor, leaving little shelter or supplies. Alexander refused to negotiate peace. After weeks of waiting and with winter approaching, Napoleon ordered a retreat. Harassed by Cossacks, robbed by starving peasants, and frozen by the brutal cold, the Grande Armée disintegrated. Only a fraction managed to cross the Berezina River in late November. Up to 1 million soldiers and camp followers died in the campaign. The legend of invincibility was shattered. Russia's triumph emboldened the rest of Europe. In 1813, Prussia and Sweden joined Russia in a new coalition, and though Napoleon won battles at Lutzen and Bautzen, the Allies regrouped. Austria initially mediated, but eventually sided against him. At Dresden, he won another costly victory, but it was his last. In October, the combined armies of Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Sweden converged on Leipzig in the largest battle of the Napoleonic Wars. The fighting raged for days and ended in disaster for the French. Tens of thousands of his soldiers were killed or captured, and many more deserted during the retreat. France's enemies advanced across the Rhine and invaded his homeland. In 1814, as Wellington's British forces crossed into southern France and coalition armies converged on Paris, Napoleon fought a series of brilliant battles but could not stem the tide. He refused initial peace terms that would have left him Emperor of France within its natural borders, hoping for a reversal. When Paris capitulated and his marshals turned against him, he was forced to abdicate. In a poignant farewell to his old guard at Fontainebleau, he spoke of their shared glory and of his sacrifice for the nation. He attempted to take poison but survived because the dose had lost its potency. The Allies exiled him to the small island of Elba off the Tuscan coast. There he became sovereign of a domain of 12,000 inhabitants. He busied himself with plans to improve roads and agriculture, but his mind remained fixed on France. Elba could not hold his ambition. Word reached him that King Louis XVIII was unpopular, that the allowance promised to him was withheld, and that he might be banished to a remote island in the Atlantic. Grieving the death of Joséphine and yearning for his son, he decided to gamble everything on a return. On the 26th of February, 1815, he slipped away on a small brig with a handful of soldiers and landed on the French coast near Gulf Juan. As he marched north, villagers and soldiers flocked to him. When an army regiment confronted him on the road, he stepped forward alone and opened his coat, inviting them to shoot. The soldiers instead shouted, "Vive Empereur!" and joined him. Marshals who had vowed to bring him back in a cage switched sides. Louis fled, and Napoleon entered Paris to the delirious cheers of crowds. For a brief period, known as the 100 Days, he was emperor again. He sought to rally the nation, promised constitutional reforms, and raised an army of raw recruits and National Guards. But Europe would not tolerate his return. The powers assembled vast armies and pledged to end his rule once and for all. Knowing that the coalition forces were mobilizing separately, Napoleon decided to strike in Belgium to divide and defeat them. In June, his army of the north crossed into the Low Countries. He won at Ligny against the Prussians and fought the Anglo-Allied army to a draw at Quatre Bras. On the 18th of June at Waterloo, he attacked the Duke of Wellington's troops, hoping to break them before Prussian reinforcements arrived. His men fought tenaciously in mud under relentless fire, but repeated assaults failed to break the Allied lines. Late in the day, the Prussians under Blücher arrived on his right flank and pushed through. The French army broke and fled. Napoleon's final gamble had failed. Returning to Paris, he found the legislature and his ministers had lost faith. He abdicated a second time in favor of his son and attempted to flee to the United States. British ships blockaded his escape. Facing no alternative, he surrendered to Captain Maitland of HMS Bellerophon and was transported as a prisoner. This time, the victors chose a far more remote exile. They sent him to Saint Helena, a volcanic island in the South Atlantic, more than 1,000 miles from any mainland. He arrived in October 1815, accompanied by a small retinue. For the first months, he lived in a pavilion, then moved to Longwood House, a damp and windswept dwelling infested with rats. The British governor, Hudson Lowe, enforced strict regulations, limited his visitors, and cut his expenses. Napoleon maintained imperial ritual, held formal dinners, and insisted on titles, a deliberate denial of his captivity. He spent his days dictating memoirs, reading, and walking when health allowed. He learned English briefly, but gave up because he found the language difficult. He wrote letters complaining of his treatment to stir sympathy in Europe, but the Allies refused to reconsider. His health declined, possibly exacerbated by the damp climate, confinement, and stress. He suffered abdominal pain, nausea, and weakness. His physician, Barry O'Meara, diagnosed hepatitis and warned that the conditions might kill him, but the governor dismissed the concern. In his final years, his household dwindled as companions returned to Europe. He grew more isolated and depressed, walking less and spending long hours in his study. In April 1821, he was confined to his bed. He drafted 2 wills in which he accused the English oligarchy of assassinating him and predicted the downfall of the restored Bourbons. On the 5th of May, he whispered his last words, variously recorded as a litany of France, the army, his head of the army, and Joséphine. He died aged 51. Doctors removed his heart and intestines and later concluded he had succumbed to stomach cancer, the same disease that had killed his father. Rumors of arsenic poisoning circulated, but traces of arsenic were found in samples of his hair from childhood and in his relatives, suggesting environmental exposure rather than murder. He was buried with military honors in the Valley of the Geraniums on Saint Helena. In 1840, his body was exhumed, found remarkably preserved inside multiple coffins, and returned to France. Parisians turned out by the hundreds of thousands to witness his funeral procession. His remains were placed beneath the dome of Les Invalides, where they rest today. What remains is not merely the story of battles and crowns, but the legacy of an extraordinary human being. Napoleon's civil code influenced legal systems across Europe and beyond. His administrative reforms, metric system, and centralized bureaucracy helped forge the modern French state. His educational system produced generations of engineers, doctors, and officers. He emancipated Jews and other religious minorities, abolished feudalism, and fostered meritocracy, yet he also suppressed the free press, reinstated slavery, and reduced women's rights. As a commander, he revolutionized warfare. He organized armies into corps that could march independently and unite quickly, integrated artillery and cavalry, and emphasized speed and decisive concentration. Military thinkers still study his campaigns. Clausewitz considered him a genius, and Wellington called him the greatest soldier of the age. Yet his wars consumed millions of lives and devastated entire regions. His conquests awakened nationalist sentiment in Germany, Italy, and Spain, sowing the seeds for future nation-states. Napoleon's character defies simple categorization. He was a brilliant strategist, a voracious reader, and a master of propaganda. He possessed an iron will and boundless energy. He was capable of magnanimity, pardoning émigrés and offering peace terms. Yet he could be ruthless, ordering massacres and suppressing dissent. He loved pomp and ceremony but worked tirelessly on minutiae. He inspired loyalty and fear, charming allies, and bullying ministers. He considered himself heir to Roman emperors and to the revolution. He saw destiny in his own hands, telling his soldiers that there were no bad regiments, only bad colonels. He was called the Little Corporal by his troops for his ability to share their hardships, yet he crowned himself emperor in imitation of Charlemagne. His myth grew during his life and exploded after his death. Romantic artists portrayed him as a hero betrayed by reactionary powers. Liberals saw him as the champion of meritocracy, conservatives as a tyrant. Historians debate whether he perpetuated or betrayed the revolution. To some, he stands alongside Alexander and Caesar as one of the great captains of history. To others, he is a cautionary tale of unchecked ambition and the perils of total war. He changed borders, laws, and societies, but he could not escape the human limits of mortality and pride. 2 centuries after his death, the name Napoleon still evokes awe and controversy. Streets, cities, and laws across the world bear marks of his influence. Military academies study his campaigns, jurists debate his laws. His rise from a provincial boy to the ruler of an empire speaks to the power of ambition and the possibilities opened by revolutionary times. His fall warns of the dangers of overreach and hubris. He left behind a France transformed, and Europe redrawn, and a legend that continues to fascinate. On that remote island where he breathed his last, he knew that he had embodied both the promise and the peril of his age. The story of Napoleon Bonaparte is not just about one man, it is about how ideas, wars, and personalities can shape the destinies of millions. By tracing his life from Corsican childhood to imperial coronation and isolated death, we see a panorama of human potential and folly. In the end, the boy from Ajaccio who dreamed amid snowdrifts achieved greatness and paid its price. His legacy lives on in the laws we obey, the nations we inhabit, and the cautionary tales we tell our children about the pursuit of power.